What's up, everybody? It's the Roundtable Sports Podcast. My name is Taylor McLean, and I'm excited to get back to podcasting with you today. Taking a short hiatus while I was getting everything kind of lined up for this upcoming football season. And football season is coming up. You're about to have a flood of news of who looks good and who doesn't look good, and what teams like what player and the like. So it's about to really hit home when all these different stories start coming out, and we're going to have news to trade on in the fantasy world. We've kind of been struggling for that news, but luckily a couple of the deadlines that come up around this time have given us some stuff to talk about. Plus, Deandre Hopkins finally picked a team. So we've got some good stuff to go over today. So I'm excited to be back. Once again, just taking a little time to get my batteries charged. And they are fully charged going into this season. It's a pivotal season for me. So I've been getting ready. I've lost 30 pounds. So I'm back down to my what I call my jujitsu weight. Because when I did Brazilian jiu-jitsu for 3 years in college, I lost all this weight, got down to like 164, put on another 10 to put me at 175. That was always my favorite weight and how I looked and felt and performed in jiu-jitsu. So it was always something that I wanted to do. And I weighted at 176 today. So certainly feel like I'm hitting on all cylinders when it comes to my body and my health and my mind when it comes to football, because I've been studying, I've been drafting. I've drafted well over 200 teams. I meant to look it up and give you a solid number. I'm going to say it's above 250, probably closer to 300 now. We won't give it a solid number yet, but they're all tournament best ball teams that I've already drafted, all for money. So I've definitely got a good feel for where everybody's going and what's happening in the draft landscape. And now we're about to get the stories that are going to shape a lot of the final average draft position of these players. Because, when basically drafting kind of opens up after the NFL draft, right? So the players that are getting drafted right there, we don't know that Brock Purdy is going to come back at a certain time, or we don't know about Saquon not getting his deal done and potentially holding out, or Jacobs, or all those guys are certainly in jeopardy, and that could affect closing line ADP. What are you drafting these guys at in August when all the information is out there and we've seen training camps, information and stories, and we've seen the preseason? I can't wait to see preseason games again. That's how charged my batteries are when it comes to football. So I'm excited to get on that for you and for me, as far as getting in there and trying to make sense of all this. And of course, when you drafted that many teams, you've really fleshed out your feelings on how you think things are going to go. And I certainly have done so to this point. So I'm excited to see the news come out and see what everybody has to say about everything when we see it at training camp, and who's going to win these different training camp battles and the like. The first thing, that had kind of come out that got me excited and really got my blood rushing as far as news at this time of year was that DeAndre Hopkins finally signed with the Tennessee Titans. It turns out to be for 2 years and $26 million. They haven't exactly said what the guarantees are yet, but it seems like $6 million of that is incentive based. Basically, incentives that if he were to have a regular DeAndre Hopkins season, he would probably hit. Per Ian Rappaport, it's up to $1 million for 95 catches, all the way down to 250 for 65 catches. Certainly something he's capable of if they feature him at all. Same with the yardage, 1 million for 1,050 yards, all the way down to 250 for 750. And then finally, 4 touchdowns, 250, 1 million, 10 touchdowns. And there's some levels in there, but I didn't want to go through every last bit of that. But essentially, it's an extra $3 million a year. That would insinuate that the rest of it is pretty much good to go. Which hard to say on the second year without them saying that as far as the guarantees at this time. But anyway, it's a solid deal for the Titans for sure. They really had a void at their second wide receiver position. As a matter of fact, it kind of made me not as excited to draft Ryan Tannehill overall or try and stack the Tennessee Titans because it was either Traylon Burks or Chig Okongwu. And then there was like this void, and I wasn't in on Ilakine, Westbrook Ilakine, excuse me, the other person that I don't even know his name. I think he's a rookie, Phil something. Anyway, basically didn't even learn their names because I just wasn't drafting that position. And so I didn't lose any value on that end when DeAndre signed. I did have a little higher hopes for the signing. Like I have him with Patrick, I have him with Mac Jones, which is probably a lateral signing, but Patrick or Josh or something like that would have been a much bigger name to pair him with and offensive scheme to pair him with. But he should be plenty featured as one of three competent pass catchers in this offense. And then Derrick Henry doesn't really garner as many of the targets. He still takes away from the passing game overall, touch wise, just by the offense wanting to run the ball so much. But there's definitely plenty of targets for him. We've seen Tannehill, support a wide receiver with AJ Brown, with Jarvis Landry. There's been some big misses though too. Like Julio was washed up, I guess, but just a couple of guys that I didn't like seeing what I saw from them with Tannehill, and then they get away from Tannehill and they're either just as good or better, or just something about that relationship wasn't working out there. So it's definitely not a sexy situation, not exactly what my hopes were. I kind of had pinned it in that it was going to be a situation with the New England Patriots. I thought that's where he was going to end up going. I thought maybe they'd up their offer and end up bringing him home because they definitely could have used that presence more than I think Tennessee could, just from an offensive standpoint and from a fit standpoint. But he made his choice and took as much money as he possibly could, which I do not blame him at all for. This is kind of probably his last contract, at least of this size. He'll probably have time to sign that contender deal after this deal. So I think he's trying to, keep his timeline open. And it was one of the bigger voids in the situation. Like the same thing with kind of like the Falcons after Pitts and after Drake London. There's not really it's like Mac Hollins, and you can get him in the super last round 100% of the time. This definitely prevents the Titans from having a void at that situation, and it might take away from Traylon Burks, but honestly I think it helps the offense so much that they can't double Traylon, that there should be more explosive plays from Traylon because he's not getting as much bulk coverage, because outside of Chig Okongwu, there wasn't going to be that much to cover overall. So I think in this situation, it does raise the tides of all the boats enough where I think it's not that bad a thing for Traylon. And I'll be looking to buy in on, the dip with him, because I think people will discount him more. Same with Chig. In fact, they already have started to do that. And I don't see Deandre Hopkins moving up all that much since the team isn't that sexy. I think him going at the 4th, 5th round is kind of where it's appropriate, but I won't be going after him quite the same. And I think we'll see a big rise in Ryan Tannehill. And I'm interested to see what it'll do to Derrick Henry, because I've got a ton of 3rd round Derrick Henry and even a little bit of 2nd round. But when when it turns to the 3rd round right there, in a lot of those drafts, I've got Derrick Henry. So we'll see what it can do for him value wise. I don't think that they're going to really change the way they do things exactly. I just think it does increase the proficiency of the offense, because it goes from being such a void to being a position of strength now when you have those 3 pass catchers, Traylon, DeAndre Hopkins, and Okongwu, who I really like. I like both Traylon and Okongwu. I mean, if they were with another team, or they would be even bigger smashes to me, just because of their athletic profile and talent. They're kind of game wreckers, both of them, on the field when they get the ball in their hand, and of course with Traylon's ability to go deep and the like. If they had Josh Allen behind them, if it's Traylon Burks instead of Gabe Davis, I'm just smashing Traylon Burks as much as I possibly can right there. But it is what it is, and it's certainly, it's a position of low impact as far as affecting stacks for what I've already drafted and whatnot. So I'm definitely okay with it, but I would have liked to have seen him more with a contender or something along those lines. But it is what it is. There was another deal, Evan Engram, 3 years, $42 million. I thought that was interesting. It was one of the deals that got done pre-franchise tag, so that was a good deal for the Jacksonville Jaguars to not have to deal with him long term, as far as him wanting his money, being unhappy, and the like. And they didn't seem to be able to work him in with better success as the season progressed and as they got more comfortable throwing the ball down the field. It wasn't like just a gangbuster situation for Trevor just right off the bat either. It took some time for everything to kind of set in and for them to be able to work the ball down the field with some consistency. That should increase with Evan being able to stay out on the field as a tight end in more running situations, although he was used on the backside. Hopefully, this deal means more routes out there for him. But they're also going to have Calvin Ridley running around out there in addition to Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. And Calvin traditionally is a little bit more suited to being a number one wide receiver than Christian Kirk, Evan Engram, or Zay Jones, and kind of puts everybody in their appropriate role in the passing game, which I'm a big fan of. It kind of clarifies everything for everybody and gives everybody the appropriate amount of coverage for them to exploit. And all three, including all four, including Calvin, are capable of exploiting single coverage in their zones and in their areas of expertise. And when you have those type of skill position players for a player like Trevor, it makes for a lot of easy plays, makes for a lot of separations, and it makes for a lot of throws down the field. And down the field is the hardest part of the field to work, especially when it comes to the efficiency aspect. And they got more efficient as the year went on. And I think with a jump in that efficiency, that'll increase the amount of, yards, amount of big plays, amount of touchdowns, all of those things. And it'll also back defenses off so they can work the underneath stuff for a player like Evan, who gets the ball in his hands and is capable of running with it afterwards. They're all capable of running with it. They don't have the big time alpha on the outside. That's the big guy. That's going to default to Evan, which means he could be in line for a big season. He's disappointed us before, but he's come through for us before as well. And this version of Trevor is by far the best quarterback he's ever played with. Daniel Jones playing better, but certainly was in no shape to really be feature to uplift Evan in the way that he can be uplifted by Trevor Lawrence. Now, adding Calvin does mean a lot more mouths to feed just by Calvin probably assuming that number one role. If he can't, that's one thing for Evan's value, but I think it's better to have him in there. Like I said, clarify the roles, give Evan a whole bunch of free space to operate up the seams and make him a target in the red zone as well for more red zone targets. I think that could be a big win. And I think Jacksonville overall is a big win if you can get any of those players, even though having to draft Calvin Ridley in the third round is a lot. And certainly, he has to come through in a huge way to have that type of price pay off. But I think he is a capable player of doing so. It was just a lot more sexy when you could get him in like the fourth or fifth round, which I did a couple of times. So we'll hope those teams pay off. Now, I think even bigger than the actual signings that took place were the lack of signings. And now it's a lot of what people are talking about on Twitter and the like is just the running back contracts overall. Like the average salary of running backs is 1.8 million and the kicker salary is 2.1 million. And that's skewed a little bit by, the overall size of the running back markets and backups and all that stuff. But still, it was a pretty sobering situation. And then a bunch of all of the franchise running backs didn't reach a deal. Saquon, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard. I think anybody who's drafted any of those guys just hopes that they take the money and run. But it does seem like there's going to be some consequences for what the Giants and what the Raiders have done here. And hopefully it doesn't play out into the season absolutely could. Saquon immediately started slipping kind of when it became clear they weren't going to reach a deal. He started slipping to nearly the third round just on the risk that he does pull a Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon definitely came out with a worse deal overall and ended up ruining his career doing what he did sitting out. Maybe it works out better for Saquon or Josh Jacobs or Tony. Tony has shown no sort of qualms about playing on the franchise tag. Saquon and Josh Jacobs definitely have. Jacobs had an ominous tweet I didn't like with my big time exposure to Josh Jacobs. Guessing that'll drive his prices down too. They haven't been as precipitous just because Saquon was kind of like towards the end of the first round. That's where he was. And now, like I said, it's more of the second, third round. So that's why sometimes drafting at this time versus at the very beginning works versus, you could have gotten Alexander Madison earlier on in the year in like the ninth round in some of these drafts. So this is something that we're going to see. Saquon slipping, Josh Jacobs slipping. I think they end up playing all the games and just try to do what they can do, but they've only got so much leverage for this kind of thing. And they may, hold out a couple of games just because they can. And just because, you know, they're definitely trying to strike a blow, kind of like the actors and the writers. There's a lot of this kind of workers' strife thing going on, and the running backs are feeling a little twinge in their market, and they're not liking it. And it's like going through a car crash multiple times a game, and it takes special individuals to be able to handle that. And it also lessens the career span of these players, and getting stuck with a huge tag on these players can be a burden when you're paying Zeke what you were paying him, and he's no longer on the roster. Although I was talking with my dad, and I've been thinking about this for some time, it makes a lot of sense for Zeke to come back. And it's also further that Zeke, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, Dalvin Cook, there it is, don't have deals yet and haven't signed with anybody. We're still waiting on that. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins was kind of the first domino that needed to fall with some of that. Plus, I mean, we're days away, or by the time you're listening to this, maybe it's happening right now, that they are reporting to camp, and at least the rookies are, and then the veterans will right after that. And then we will have all kinds of stories and all kinds of mayhem going on that kind of inform our decisions on who we're going to draft and what's going to happen here. And we'll get the first inklings of that with the preseason, which I can't wait to watch. But we're definitely not going to have any preseason games from Saquon and Josh Jacobs. This is going to linger for a minute. And that's really their only leverage in all this. They can't, I don't, we've gone through this before with like Le'Veon. Like there was always this thing like, well, they can do this and this and still strike a deal. I'm not so sure with this franchise tag thing. I think they had this deadline, and now the only thing that the guys can do to make them pay is to hold out their services and make a point, I guess. But they need to be getting their There's like this. It's kind of like wrestling. When you're wrestling every day, like as a pro wrestler, they call it building up a callus. And it's your joints, it's your limbs, it's hitting all the time. You see it on the field in the game, but it's also practice too, like in training camp and all of that. Every one of those hits is stress on those joints. And for these players that aren't going to build up that callus, whether it's Saquon or Josh or Zeke or Leonard Fournette, they're all in danger of falling prey to this where you don't have that resistance to being hit built up. And much like wrestlers who just come in for WrestleMania, like The Rock or something along those lines, they're always way, way, way more worried about getting hurt in those moments because they haven't been wrestling for months on end and having built up that resistance in their tendons to having those tendons be bent the wrong way or being detached from where they're supposed to be attached to. So definitely a risk with the holdout players as well as the players that are unsigned, that they have more of that risk than someone like DeAndre, who has all the skills in the world and now is also going to have the opportunity to build up that resistance, unlike his counterparts in the running back position. Speaking of running back positions that have had some things kind of work themselves out, Joe Mixon did actually restructure his contract, taking a pay cut that the Bengals had been saying that he was going to have to take to stay with the team. He did that. And although there's stories cropping up, he may have a suspension coming, just like who else I want to talk about, Alvin Kamara. That kind of cropped up on me. I wasn't expecting that exactly, that he might have like a 2 game suspension in the pipes, but that's certainly on the table. But the way that the Bengals really haven't replaced him from the personnel they've brought in, they really have brought in more complementary pieces than they have pieces that are going to challenge Joe Mixon with this move. I think it's safe to say that he's going to be with the Bengals. And I also like the way that the Bengals have upgraded their line in the last couple of years. And then this last year, getting Orlando Brown on what I felt like was a solid deal in comparison to what other left tackles got. I thought that was good for Joe Burrow and alike for Joe Mixon in this instance, where he's going to step into a pretty substantial role, especially without Samaje Perine. I don't think people realize how much of a role Samaje Perine played in the offense. And if Joe Mixon can absorb more of the Samaje Perine role than you might realize, then I think he's going to pay off in a big way. And with everything else that's going on off the field and the like, he could definitely pay off on that. And but do realize with your Best Ball Mania team, somebody drafted him in like the 8th round at some point. So could be some wild mood. There's been some wild swings on Joe Mixon and where he's going and everything. And now that he's done the restructure and he's going to be with an offense that we all like, I think this is where he's probably going to settle right at the end of the 4th and 5th round, like we've been talking about with some of these guys already. The other guy is Alvin Kamara, and he is no longer going to go to trial. We still have a trial with Joe Mixon that's apparently going down in August, although, as we've seen with the Alvin Kamara situation, that can get delayed and delayed and delayed. And now Alvin Kamara has come up with a plea deal for a misdemeanor on his charges rather than a felony charge. So that's in the books and settled now. And his price hasn't shot up quite like I thought it would. Maybe people thought that it was going to go by the wayside and nothing was going to happen with this, but it's always been my expectation that there's going to be some sort of suspension. I'm not 100% on the Joe Mixon one. I am 100% that Alvin Kamara is going to get something. It's just a question of, is it 2 or is it 6 or what is it going to be? Also, what is the New Orleans offense going to be with Derek Carr? I've got a lot of questions about this team. My thought process is that Derek Carr is capable of supporting 3 people: a number 1 wide receiver, Chris Olave in this instance is my thought process. I don't think Michael Thomas is going to be that guy. He's capable of supporting a tight end, which I think that's going to be Juwan Johnson. Although Taysom will get some high value touches and the like, I still think Juwan is going to be a favorite of Derek Carr. And then Alvin Kamara, or could be Jamal Williams, or could be both. There has been traditional roles for 2 running backs when it comes to Alvin Kamara, and then a bigger back to take some of the brunt of the between the tackle stuff and the goal line stuff away and make it where you're not having to put as much of the brunt on Alvin so that he lasts a whole season. And then you can blow everybody out in week 16 with a 5 touchdown performance or something along those lines if you're Alvin. Although I'm drafting him, I still haven't forgiven him for that moment, as I was on the wrong end of that at one point. But regardless, I like Jamal Williams, that he's going to have a standalone role. And then the other thing is there's about 5 to 6 rounds worth of difference as far as where you're drafting Alvin Kamara versus Jamal, because it's about the 8th or 9th round. Maybe in the 10th, there's a lot of variance around Alvin right there. And then Jamal is more of the 11th to 13th round. He doesn't typically make it that far, but there is a lot of variance with Jamal as well, especially now that, it's kind of how you're reading the tea leaves in any given draft, how that's going to go. But I like Jamal Williams a whole lot. And I think that He's going to have a chip on his shoulder with the way he feels like he was disrespected by Detroit and the Packers. And he can catch the ball a lot better than they gave him credit for in Detroit. So he's capable of being a 3-down back without Alvin Kamara. Alvin slowed down a bit last year, in my estimations, with his running abilities, and didn't miss as many tackles and didn't have great quarterback play. So Derek Carr is absolutely capable of improving on that. And that can mean a lot for the offense and for Alvin. But I think Jamal is going to sop up a lot of that. And without Alvin being the exact elite weapon he used to be, that could be a problem. However, I think he could absolutely dial it back too. You never know with this age of running back whether they're going to be able to hang on to it or whether they're going to start taking steps back. And it's been a couple of seasons without Sean Payton where it seems like it's been taking a step back, but they also haven't had the superior check down and decision making abilities of Drew Brees at the helm. And if Derek Carr is anything, he is a check down machine. And I think that, number one reads in the offense, and then the tight end and running back, which are the check downs, are what Derek is capable of supporting. Goes to show you with the Raiders last year, that's kind of how it worked out. Although the Raiders had a problem with the second wide receiver, probably played into it some as well. But that's always been my estimation of Derek Carr at this moment in his career. Although felt like he did support like Amari and Crabtree. Amari and Crabtree at that time, this pair is not. I mean, I love Olave, so maybe that's wrong. Maybe Olave can bring them up, and they get something out of Michael Thomas, and they're good to go. But I don't know. Not as hopeful on the Michael Thomas thing when he hasn't really played a full season in some time and been relevant in some time. I don't know. I just haven't been able to make the jump where he's going. There's too many good-looking second and third tier running backs right there usually. So it is what it is. But I just have some misgivings about that with Kamara. And that's why I've got Jamal Williams as my second most drafted player right after Deontay Foreman, who is going to win the Chicago Bears running back job. Come on, Deontay. You can do it. I know you can. You two are going to buoy my fantasy season. I hope I will be a rich man if those two have the seasons that they're capable of having and hit their ceilings, because that's a bunch of my teams have them. But anyway, nobody cares about your fantasy team until it wins a bunch of money. So we'll hope that some of mine have. Finishing up the signing stuff, because there's a bunch of stuff to go through that since I haven't podcasted in some time, taking that little break. And Quinnen Williams, I thought that was a really good move by the Jets to get him locked up, even with it being for 4 years, $96 million. That's a lot of money for a defensive tackle. But when the defensive tackles are worth it and when they are capable of wrecking a game on the level that Quinnen Williams is capable of wrecking a game, then and the command a double team. And if you don't double team them, then you are really putting your offense and your quarterback in jeopardy. Those are the type of guys that you pay. He has quick, nimble feet. You see him moving around out there. And if a guard gets put into any space with him, they are in trouble because he's so nimble. He can kind of tiptoe and tap around them. And then he's also generating a ton of strength during all that tipping and moving around. And then you throw on the fact that he's got violent hands and he does a good job of getting the offensive lineman's hands off of him and then creating that space with the speed and strength and being able to plow through and get to the quarterback. When you're able to create that kind of pressure from that position, that is invaluable to an NFL defense. And it's the kind of thing that can buoy an entire defense. And Quinnen is one of those guys. I feel like it's rare when they're able to deliver on the type of promise he had going as the 3 pick to the New York Jets. I feel like the hit rate on guys to be able to come through to the point where you want to give him a contract like this is few and far between. And I can't say how impressive it's been to watch him kind of grow into that role. Now he's got to stay on the field. He's had some issues staying on the field up until this point, but when he's out there, he's a game wrecker. And it's everybody that has trouble staying on the field during a long season. I've played, I believe my season was 13 games. and by the end of it, you're just so, if you don't have an injury, you haven't been playing. Like that's how brutal it is. And I wasn't always going against 300-pound guys. It wasn't quite the same car wreck, because each one of these collisions, these big tackles you're seeing, that's a car wreck. And these guys are getting hit by Mack truck levels of force, and I've felt the regular truck level, and I felt the big truck too, and it's not a lot of fun. So when you see these guys, you know, I think a lot of people think about the guys that last a long time, the 10-year veterans. Those guys are few and far between. The average career is like 2.5, I think, or maybe it's 3.5, but it's not the 4 years that they need to get vested in all their benefits and stuff. And the medical runs out at some point, and there's also like the quality of life issues. Like I feel really fortunate to be able to have walked as many miles as I have to get to this point, to be on the cusp of what I'm on the cusp of as far as doing this. And I wouldn't be able to have walked that many miles to get that money to keep my window open, if I'd have had one of these major injuries, or even some of the injuries that aren't even that major that some of these guys have in their legs. And watching some of the old NFL players walk around now, you have to know that these guys are really earning that money, and that a lot of them don't really realize what they're doing and how it's not going to last, and they end up outliving that money, and they have a great couple years and stuff, but then they're not able to work afterwards, or they're so, the fame is still there, but then they don't have the money to be able to shield themselves from it a little bit, and it's going to be a lot to deal with. So I hope these players are saving their money. I hope they're living like they're not earning it, like Gronk, like never living beyond like what his in like never spending his NFL salary, that kind of thing, and just living off of his endorsements. Not every player is so so fortunate, right? Gronk is extremely marketable, and you know an icon. So for him to be able to do that is one thing, versus the other NFL players, that's another, right? But still, I hope they're socking it away, because you can set yourself up for life, or you can set yourself up for a lot of disappointment too. And there's a lot of people trying to prey on those people. There's a lot of predatory people in general in today's world. So hope they're on the lookout for that. And don't mean to get off on that diatribe when we're talking about something positive like Quinnen Williams, because it's so cool to see someone like that be able to do what he does. Especially for me, this is my area of expertise, is the offensive line and the trenches. So that's something that I super appreciate, is when someone is really doing that well. And I made a video on Quinnen, and I went in there and I went through not just the highlights, but I just watched some of his game tape and stuff. And he really is impressive. And I can't wait to see more of him. And I hope he's able to stay healthy. And I hope I get to see the Jets in there, with a quality quarterback, and see what they can do in that division that's pretty loaded. The Patriots being the worst team and having really improved with Buffalo, with the Dolphins already being where they're at, and with the Jets already being what they're at, I think they're really going to add some wins, because their quarterback play was truly atrocious last year. It was really bad. So it'd be interesting when we get to see it in Hard Knocks too. This is the Hard Knocks team, so we'll get to see some Zach and A-Rod, and we'll get to see A-Rod up close, and he'll be hamming it up for the camera, no doubt. Brees, I've been fading Brees Hall, so that could be bad. He could get a big boost. I think Garrett Wilson and A-Rod are made for each other. Like, I think they're really going to explode, and then I think it's going to be Alan Lazard, and then it's going to be everybody else kind of going for the scraps. That's my estimation of it. So I've been trying to get Allen. I've been trying to get a lot of Garrett Wilson. Well, but Garrett's price, he goes, at the end of the first round. So that's harder and harder to come by. He's been slipping a little bit, but not with the wide receivers are crazy. Should be interesting in home drafts to see if that carries over, but wide receivers have been crazy up until this point. So anyway, something else, final thing for today, Javonte Willams back in the mix this year after the really bad knee injury, a knee injury that I feel like usually takes people 2 years to come back from. So it's the year after is usually the best year for these guys. Javonte came out and said that he's going to be good to go for training camp. That's just Javonte saying that, though, as it turns out. It's not the team saying that. So you got to take that with a somewhat grain of salt, that the team still has to clear him. But it is good that he is feeling good, and that Sean Payton does know how to diagram offense pretty well. Sean Payton is one of the offensive coordinators that I believe in, for the record. And Nathaniel Hackett, I think he thought he could do like an Aaron Rodgers thing where Aaron's doing a lot of the diagramming and a lot of the help with the offense and stuff. It's been clear that that's not Russ's game. He needs to be managed. And I've always said that I thought Sean Payton could manage him in exactly the right way and set him up to make the decisions he needs to make, because he can make solid decisions on third down. He can, get the ball to the open part of the field. He can create time with his legs when he just chooses to do so. He just didn't have like the scheme or the year one fit, or just there was all these things working to create this Russell thing. And I think that this season is going to turn it around. And I think that having whoever is going to work out in the Broncos backfield is a big deal, because I love the talent on Javonte, but I got to think it's going to be more like J.K. Dobbins, where you see a shell of him, and he's good and he's better than what they have, but he's still not quite his full self, and he's not going to quite get over the hump to be worth an 8th round pick. Like, he's kind of worth it in like the 9th or 10th, right? That's worth when it's worth taking a shot, but he's kind of been creeping up ever since he said this. So we'll see where he kind of ends up in the end. But I've got some of that, but I've got a lot more Samaje Perine. And as I talked about earlier with Joe Mixon, I really like Samaje Perine. And I think that Sean Payton's going to like him. I think that he's going to play the pass catching role of the offense, much in the way that he did before, but he's a lot sturdier between the tackles than your typical guy that would take that role. So if Javonte's not ready, or if Javonte, they take a really light touch with him, or if he, God forbid, re-injures himself or puts himself in a situation where he needs to sit down and give it the rest of the year, they're in a position to take advantage, or Samaje's in a position to take advantage of that, and they're in a position to use him in that way. And I don't think that Sean Payton in his time off has lost the ability to diagram run plays and put his running back in a position to succeed. He uses them around the goal line, which I painfully recounted earlier with the Alvin Kamara situation. That's not a new thing. And Samaje is absolutely capable of, doing whatever you need him to do at the goal line, whether it's catch it, whether it's running between the tackles with proficiency. He does all of those things. So I've been ending up with a lot more Samaje, kind of letting him fall when somebody kind of takes Javonte too early. But I also have Javonte too. They're both very talented, and I just want to take shots at Sean Payton in the offense. Jerry Jeudy, you have to kind of take a little bit more of a leap of faith in the 4th round, but everybody else is pretty well contained. And Jeudy was even able to show something last year. And I love the talent. And sometimes I'm just a year early on these guys because I love the talent, but the role isn't quite there. And the role may end up being there for Jerry Jeudy in this offense and for what Sean Payton likes to do. I think they're all a perfect fit here. So I'm trying to take that leap of faith as leapfully as I possibly can, and with as much, caution too, because I definitely took some of that leap last year and was, as we all know, that didn't work out at all. So that didn't work out worth a dang. Anyway, well, that's what I've got for today. I'm super excited to be back in the mix podcasting. I just had to take a break and recharge the batteries, and I think I picked the best time to do so. I drafted teams. I'm ready to recount all this with you and get you ready for your drafts, in addition to just talking about the talent and the news and everything. So it's a big year for the podcast. Upcoming sponsorship, hopefully we've got that worked out. I've got the video room set up, so we're going to have more videos of the podcast and everything. So we're working on all that, and it's been a process, but we're taking the leap this year, and I hope you're coming with me. Appreciate your time today. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time.